Thank you. And we still have some time. I think we have about 20 minutes still. Yes, because we're supposed to end at 3:15, so that's great. And maybe not everyone has the time, but I do, and we do. So thank you so much for bringing this film and letting us watch the film. I think our plan is for myself to ask one question and Lorianne one question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Do you want to start or shall I start? Go ahead. So one of the things I'm very interested in is this adaptation process. So there's the research and the writing of the dissertation, and then there's the book, and then there's the creation of the documentary, which took, of course, a long time. So I'm curious about the way in which these stories change when they're in a book, in text, and when they're filmed. Like, do they change for you? Is this what you pictured? Is it like bringing an experience and an imagination to life? Or are you seeing these stories from a kind of radically new perspective? I'm thinking also of the fact that the interviews for the film were done by Gunhild. So that's my question.
Yeah. Well, it's been a really fascinating journey to see how the stories of these women have been transformed into different ways of communicating them. And I think that Gunhild has captured a lot of the things that I were very into in the book, and it's really fascinating to see it visualized, because of course I have my visions in my head when I wrote about it and when the women talked about it, but it's fascinating to see the archive material and their stories. So I think for the most, I think it's really fascinating to see it visualized in this way. And I also find that that some of the personality of the women is captured in the film very well. But it's been really fascinating to be part of the process. And of course, we have had our discussions, but for the most, I think we have had a really good. But of course, and also doing documentary, you need to. One difference is that doing a documentary, you have to be more you have to be more clear, or how do you say it, more. Yes, and as a researcher, I always like to, pros and cons, and I'm much so I remember we had one discussion during the filming of my interview, and the last thing I say in the film, I had to be convinced saying it anyway, because I always like to have to modify things and but for the most, I think we really had a really great cooperation, and I really like the result. I'm so proud of it.
Yes, of course, making a film, I always have to find why I want to make the film and what I want to highlight. And for me, the women's perspective, and also I know that's important for you, of course, too, but the women's liberating process from the religious, strict religious society, and finding their identity, and that was the most important part for me. So that's also why I wanted Siv to say her last sentence, because I think it really how it is. Yeah.
So my question is maybe a little bit different. One of the challenges, of course, of documentary filmmaking is that you have a time limit. We can always go a little longer maybe when we're writing a book, unless the publisher says this is firm, but sometimes you can convince them that it needs to be a little longer. That's often not the case. So what are some interesting stories or things that you would have liked to have highlighted in the documentary if you had more time to do so?
Are you asking me? Or
both of you.
I think what I would have liked, if we had more time, is that it would be possible to illuminate the variations. Like Aslaug, one of the women in the film, she was very active in the church. And if we had made a TV series, we could talk more about how some of the women, they went dancing and went all in for those activities, while others were more, into church activities. But at the same time, they too felt liberated in a way, because they could do things in the US that they couldn't do coming back. For instance, Aslaug, she talked about in her upbringing in Kvinesdal, it was not allowed going to the movies, for instance, if you were Kristelig. But coming to the US, she could go to the movies, she could go see a theater, but she also spent most of the free time in the church. So those aspects we could have elaborated more in a TV series, if it would have been that.
And in the church by this time, she could probably vote.
Yeah, yes.
That might
yeah.
not, I don't know,
Yeah.
that might not have been the case in Norway. I don't know.
Not in Norway, no.
That's a good example, because we thought so that when we were doing if we were doing a series, yes, we could go more into each character. But in one film, it's I need to think about the dramaturgy. Yeah. So it's hard to tell that. First, I tell that they are leaving from Norway, which is really. It's hard times, difficult times. We have nothing in Norway. Everything is strict. You are not allowed to do anything. Of course, I exaggerate, or not exaggerate, but when we cut it all together, it's kind of more exaggerated. But still, it's the truth. And it also gets more humoristic when I do it this way, which is, I think it's very important to use humor. I always use a lot of humor in my films. And if I then should cut to, they go to Amerika, and no, they still go to church, it will just like fall apart. So that's, it's a good example, yeah.
Maybe I will allow myself one more question, and then I see your hand and I'm coming to you, or one more comment maybe, this question of like liberation through clothing or liberation through feeling sexy. And I'm thinking about how that can be sort of one person's liberation and another person's not liberation or unfreedom. But you saw a little bit of that, I think, in the different women talking about their different relationship to clothing and how they wanted to feel in social life and things like that. So that was also really interesting, and a kind of subtlety that I thought was there. Yeah. I think we'll open it up. I see many hands. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, well, I have 3 questions. First, the men that they married, were they Norwegian? Second question is, they were there for a long time. Did they become U.S. citizens? And third, how did their children feel about moving from America back to Norway?
Many of the women married Norwegian men, but some did not. For instance, Jenny, who talked about meeting Benny, he was from Copenhagen. So and some married Americans, but I think you could say maybe 50-60% married Norwegian men. And the second question about becoming citizens, many of them became U.S. citizens. Not all of them, but quite a few. And the last question about the children, what these couples ended up thinking was that, especially if they married a Norwegian man, when the children were becoming in school age, they felt they had to decide whether they should stay in the US or return home to Norway, because they felt if our children start school in the US, they become Americans, and we won't be able to get back home. So a lot of these couples, they went back home to Norway when their kids were in school age or were attending school. Some waited for much longer. For instance, Eva in the film. So she had teenagers when returning to Norway. And I think for the teenagers coming from New York to Kvinesdal, a small place in the southern coast of Norway, was quite difficult. And several of these second generations Norwegian American kids, they return to the US when they are grown up. So Eva, she has a daughter living in Staten Island, and her son lives in Norway. But the ones that were younger, it was much easier to adapt. Yeah.
Thank you for a fantastic film. It was such fabulous to see, and I'm really impressed of the footage, the historical pictures, and also all the use you have of their photo albums. I mean, it's fantastic, and that's the first thing. And the second thing is that I think those interviews you made are really important, because this is actually preserving a story in the post-war prosperous US after the war, Second World War, because that is really a booming time. I mean, it was really on the way up after World War II. But my question, two questions. How many young women like that? Do you know approximately how many are we talking about? And are they all from this district here in southern Norway, Kvinesdal and around? Or do you have, what's your impression? I don't know. The population we are talking about, how many are they? And the second, the men, either they were Norwegian or Danish or American, in what social layer were they? What kind of professions did they have? I mean, and my impression is that most of them stayed around in Brooklyn or upstate New York. Is that so, or did they move to other parts of the US?
If I can answer the last question first. The men, they were, for the most, I think, blue-collar workers, or so like the Norwegian men that came over. Many of them were, of course, working working on tugboats, sailors and stuff like that, but also as carpenters. That was really common among the Norwegians in Brooklyn. So that was the most common, and the ones that did not return to Norway, many of them moved, out to suburban areas in the 1960s and 70s, ending up in upstate New York, New Jersey, Staten Island. Yeah, so there are not many left in the Norwegian community, or what used to be a Norwegian community back then. And regarding the numbers, I focused on the Agder counties, and the two Agder counties in the southern part of Norway had the largest percentage of immigrants from the 1890s up to the 1960s per capita. And after the Second World War, approximately 9,000 people left the Agder counties, and approximately 50% were women, a little bit under 50%. So that's the numbers that I know about. I'm not certain how many left from other parts of Norway, but in this particular era, the Agder counties were quite dominating in the statistics, I would say. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I just add a little bit about the archive material, because I think it's very important for the film, and because we only had 6 days shooting, which is extremely little for a documentary film. I normally follow people over years, so it was important to get more material, and it's been a big search and a lot of time to both find the material and collect it, and Siv has also helped us a lot with that, and also to structure it in the film, both to create a story with the archive material. So we used it in kind of 2 ways. One way is to show things, just like kind of one-to-one, but also was important to try to create the feeling the women had when going to America, the emotions and the atmosphere. Yeah.
I want to echo, thank you for this film. It brought up lots of things for me, too. I have taken the Bergensfjord, and so that was a really interesting thing. And I would just comment on the previous question. We lived in near Chicago, and we had many relatives who came during the 60s and early 70s, and women who would work in a wealthy home or some other project like that as a nanny. But they pretty much went back. But it was my grandparents' home that was the base for these people coming back and forth. So I would say, and they were not from Agder. They were from other parts of Norway, Trondheim and the Sognefjord. My question is about the ending comments and the evolution of, as a Norwegian American, my perception is that feminism is very strong in Norway, and over my lifetime, the role of women has changed enormously. And how strong is the influence of women who dared to leave and come back, I guess, if you could expand a little bit more on that.
Well, I would say that their influence is more on a really local level. So I think that especially the ones leaving these conservative rural areas, I think on a local level, I think they could be part of a kind of liberation, because they could dare to do things that weren't accepted if you were active in the church. So if you had been to the States and coming back, you could do things that weren't really accepted, but it was like, okay, she's been to the US, so okay. It was like it gave them some kind of space to do things that weren't really accepted. So I would say that in my research, on a really local level, in these conservative communities, they had an effect. But I am not that certain that they had an effect, more on a national level. I don't think so, actually. But I think on a local level, they had an effect. Yeah.
And then I had to add that, I think everything starts with one person. So when it starts in a small local, it will spread out. And as Eva says towards the end, she says it's contagious. Of course it was contagious. So when they started to break out the rules, and for instance, my mom, she's not from this area, but she still remember, and it was not that pietistic where my mom comes from, but still it's the same rules. She could not play cards on a Sunday. She could not go to cinemas. So they did go as foregangskvinner. Pioneers, thank you. Yeah, and of course this definitely had some influence.
Thank you so much for this wonderful film. I guess it was really interesting for me to watch because, and maybe like others in the room, I've lived in Norway for a certain period of time. I lived in Hamar for around 8 months on a project, and that was amazing and wonderful. And I always knew I was coming back, but I couldn't help but kind of see some of the parallels or feeling the feelings that some of these women were describing as they were like leaving their family and, moving to a completely different country, having a completely different culture, this kind of shock. And also something I learned when I was in Norway for about 6 months or so. I started having conversations with other Americans who had moved here. And I think it goes way beyond just Americans living in other countries and vice versa. But something we talked about was this feeling of being in between all the time. So, for example, like when I moved to Norway, it was during the pandemic, actually. And so, you know, when family members are concerned for your health and there's uncertainty in the world, I couldn't help but kind of draw those parallels to historical events that, you know, when my ancestors immigrated from Norway, they also would have felt and experienced. And so my question is kind of, did the women talk a lot about this kind of not being able to speak to their Norwegian family about their American experience, and also not really being able to talk with their American friends about their Norwegian experience, and this kind of negotiating all the time, being between two different realities?
I think that a lot of the women returning to Norway felt that it was hard to talk too much about America, because it could, coming back as you became like a Norwegian American when you had been in the States coming back, and you were, in one way, you were admired. You had the freedom to do things that you maybe wouldn't have done if you hadn't been in the States. But on the other hand, you couldn't exaggerate. You couldn't talk too much about how, you know, large the bridges were and all that, because then you would be like bragging about the life, and so it was kind of a, you had to live, you had to be kind of careful. And a lot of the return migrants that I've interviewed, both women and men, say that it was kind of, you had to balance, otherwise people would start talking. Yeah. So and also for the kids growing up with parents, for the ones that returned, for instance, I think they felt, as you described, living in this in between, and also for the parents, if they had grown-up children, they left and returned to Norway, they felt that they didn't have roots, you know, or maybe they had roots on each side of the Atlantic. So yeah. Thank you.
How did the participants react to the finished film?
Well, we had a great premiere in Kvinesdal, and I've never been to a cinema that full of people. It was people all over, like more in the stairs, they were all over, and no, that was just fantastic. And well, unfortunately, 2 of the ladies have passed away, but the other women were there attending the premiere, and they were so proud and very happy about the result.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'm curious, for those who stayed in America for quite a long time, raised maybe even kids there, was there much recreational travel back home? I mean, was it really that they went to America, they stayed there until they decided to move back, or were there visits, were there vacations, relatives from Norway coming to see them? Just curious.
Many of these women and people living in the US, they had a lot of contact with the relatives back home, and for instance, Jette Marie, who lived in New York and never came back home settling, but she went, you know, back and forward visiting her family many times and brought her kids, and I think it was quite common to have kind of a close relation to family and friends back home, and so that was quite common, and also for people in Norway coming over to visit. Yeah.
One kind of thing that might sort of tie things together. So what are the plans for the future? Is this film going to be shown in the United States? in the future, in Norway in the future, because we have lots of people here, and I'm sure they would be willing to tell their friends if the film is coming to a place near them.
Well, the film will be now, it's sort of being screened around Norway in cinemas, and in, I think, October it will be released on NRK, National TV Broadcasting Company, yeah. And then we don't know, so it's very exciting. If we manage to, we would like to screen it, we want to screen it in New York on the 9th of October? 9th of October.
We would love to show it in New York for the 200th centennial. So we are working on it. Yeah. So because there will be a big event there, and it will be lovely to show it in New York, especially since that's where this film is all about.
Yeah. And maybe the ball will sort of start rolling.
Yes, of course.
So
and other places will have been lovely.
future will show us. Yeah.
I think we should say thank you again for being here, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to see this wonderful documentary film, and for all the work and years that went into making this. So let's give a big round of applause and say thank you.